with respect to the Democratic Party, look, as I said in the Rose Garden right after the election, when your team loses, everybody gets deflated, and it's hard, and it's challenging. And so I think it's a healthy thing for the Democratic Party to go through some reflection.
This is Jack Rico, and welcome to the 12th episode of the Highly Relevant Podcast. I've put aside my regular pop culture show to use this forum to have important, meaningful discussions on our new American reality. We've had a little bit more than a week to digest that Donald Trump is our president. The shock has begun to slightly wear off, but now angst has settled in and many questions are starting to arise. How do we come together as a country now? What is our civic responsibility to ourselves and our fellow Americans? What actions must we now take? What responsibility must we now carry to contribute to quick and visible change in our nation? How do we not normalize Trump's dangerous and hateful stances? What are we really willing to do for change? These are tough questions to ask and tougher to even answer, but hopefully this show will give us a closer look at what we're confronting and what we can do about it. In this episode, I chat with Sean Braswell, a senior writer at Aussie.com, to take me through who he thinks are the top political contenders poised to challenge Trump in 2020. And are we officially now in the age of the celebrity president? With The Rock now also interested in becoming the man in the Oval Office, how serious do we take our celebrities' political ambitions moving forward? Also, is the psychology of America shifting to the 60s culture wars? What is the future of multiculturalism in America, and what is our role in it? Vox.com writer Sean Illing explains the complexities in maintaining a multi-ethnic democracy. I will then be joined by reporter Supporter.Berfas from the business website QUARTZ to illustrate the potential threat to corporate workplace inclusion under the Trump administration. And we end with same-sex marriage attorney and Trump supporter Supporter.Berfas about the realistic outlook at Trump nullifying same-sex marriages. As we look ahead to the future of our country, many people are asking who will be the next leader of the Democratic Party and who, on the Republican side, can rival Trump for 2020. To answer these questions, I chat with Sean Braswell, senior writer at Aussie.com, and who wrote the article, Who Might Challenge a President Trump in 2020. Thanks, Sean, for being on the podcast.
Glad to be here, Jack.
Let's jump right in and talk about who the top Democratic contenders are for 2020. Many people are saying that the reason we lost the presidency was because Clinton wasn't the right candidate for the times. If that is the case, then who is?
Well, I think you're correct. Hillary Clinton really occupied the field in 2016 and crowded out a lot of potential rising stars in the party who decided to wait their turn. And I think the opposite could be true in 2020. I think you could see a very wide open field with a dozen or more candidates, not unlike the Republican field this past year. And I think you have to start by looking at the Democrats in the Senate, from Elizabeth Warren, of course, who I think will take an even larger role in the party as a figurehead and as a major gatherer of donations for her fellow Democrats.
Let's talk about her for a little bit. What skill sets does Elizabeth have that you think might make her the front runner for 2020? Because, she's not fluffy and warm and fuzzy necessarily. She seems to be a divisive figure at times when she speaks, but she also can take it to Trump like no one else ever has.
True, and I think you're going to see a similar dynamic as developed in the early 2000s with Howard Dean being someone that liberals could back, at least early on, to oppose George W. Bush very vocally. And I think she will be the darling of the left for a while because she is such an articulate critic of Trump. But there's also, I think, going to be a movement in the party towards the more progressive side of the party, the Bernie Sanders wing of the party. And people are going to say, if we really want to win, we have to steer closer to where Bernie was in 2016 than where Hillary was. And Elizabeth Warren is just a natural leader, the most popular figure in the party to head that movement.
Then you have Cory Booker, which I thought was very interesting. I saw him speak at the Democratic National Convention, and I hate to say this, but this is true. We're looking for a new Obama, and every time we see an African American, Keith Ellison is someone that's being talked about now as the chair for the DNC. we're looking for any African American to kind of hold the same characteristic or traits that Barack Obama has. Does Corey is he even close to what Obama is?
No, and I don't think anyone's close to what Obama is. And if you look, Democrats love to fall in love. And if you look at the past two Democratic presidents, you have these really unique and very gifted politicians in Bill Clinton and Barack Obama who were able to mobilize these large coalitions of voters. And I think Cory Booker probably has the best bet to mobilize young minority female voters in 2020 to try to sort of rekindle the flame in the Obama coalition that won in 2008 and 2012. But I would also think that a potential long shot and who could do the same thing is Kamala Harris, who was just recently elected to the Senate in California and who could pull an Obama of her own, basically one partial term in the Senate before launching her bid for the presidency 4 years later.
Julian Castro is another name that's been bandied around as a Hispanic figure. When Barack Obama, the first African-American president, was elected, many liberals, many people in this country said, well, we have to follow it up with a woman. It's just the only way to continue to progress. Hispanics have also been talked about as occupying the Oval Office. Julian Castro's been a name, but I feel like he sort of kind of disappeared. He just wasn't impressive enough to many people to take a shot on him. But in 2012, he was the keynote speaker at the DNC. What about Julian Castro?
I think Castro, you're probably right. I think his moment may have passed. One of the ways to stay relevant is to continue to hold some political office, and he may make a move in Texas now that he will be finished as in Obama's cabinet. So it'll be interesting to see what he does next. If he tries to make a bid for an office in Texas, it could be a launching pad to national office, or if he waits and bides his time for a Senate seat or a Congress seat in Texas. But I think it's going to be a wait and see for Castro. I think if he is going to be relevant, it's more likely to be 8 years down the track than 4 years.
Now, I noticed you didn't mention Bernie Sanders. Don't you think that he might want to run in 2020, or this is it for him?
I think this is probably it for Bernie. I think he will be a key figure in wielding influence with whomever becomes the front runner in 2020. I think he still has a lot of clout in the party and a large following, but I see him more being the head of an internal movement right now than a viable presidential candidate in the future.
Moving over to the Republican side, in your article, you've mentioned Paul Ryan, Ted Cruz, and Marco Rubio. I don't know about Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. They're both Hispanic, but after what I saw, I feel like history would repeat itself with Donald Trump, them going against Donald. But Paul is different. How different is Paul, and can he give Donald Trump a run for his money?
Honestly, I don't see Paul Ryan being a major factor in 2020 unless
really?
he completely goes sideways on the Trump presidency. I think, as you're seeing already, Republicans, including Ryan and Cruz, are sort of starting to fall in line behind Trump, and they're realizing, kind of like kids in a candy shop, that this guy who just let them into the candy shop is the best way forward. And I think things would have to be a disaster or really start to go sideways before you would see Republicans look for a new leader. Now, I think you could get a renegade like Cruz, who will test the political winds and who has ambitions of his own, who could run in 2020, who could be sort of a turncoat and challenge Trump. But I think you'd have to be looking at that sort of turncoat right now rather than some major institutional figure in the party deciding that the party needed a new direction.
And before we wrap up, one thing that wasn't in your article because it's so new, but it's a different approach to picking somebody that's not necessarily a Democrat or a Republican in the political frame, and it's celebrities. We haven't seen this amount of interest in celebrities wanting to become president since just 2 weeks ago. Chris Rock, Kanye West, Ron Perlman have announced that they want to become presidents of the United States. The thing is, back then, it just seemed like a joke, the same way that Donald Trump running for president seemed like a joke. But now that he's actually in office, a reality star who never served one day in office in anything, shouldn't we take celebrities like Kanye West more seriously? Because I think we're moving into that age of the celebrity president. They have to connect with citizens. They have to be a little bit controversial and magnetic. And I can't stop thinking that Kanye West could actually have a shot. Am I crazy?
I think it's not beyond the realm of possibility anymore. And if you look at Trump as part of the tail end of a longer phenomenon, if you think back to Arnold Schwarzenegger, even Ronald Reagan,
right?
Bobby Ventura, we've had a tendency to go towards celebrities. Even Barack Obama himself, people derided him for being a celebrity candidate, but that was part of his appeal as well. And I think Trump, the fact that someone with no political experience, like you said, has made it to the highest office in the land is going to make it that pathway that much more viable, and you could see some unusual prospects. And I think you're much more likely to see a celebrity than a billionaire businessman to follow Trump. Because
like a Bloomberg.
For one reason, because of the scrutiny. I think a lot of billionaires don't want to undergo the scrutiny that Trump underwent during the campaign. Even though he didn't release his taxes, he refused to do lots of things. He still was under a microscope. And I think celebrities are more accustomed to being under a microscope, including their personal lives, than billionaire businessmen and women are.
It's incredible. The fact that we have to take celebrities now very seriously on their political plans. It's just, we're living in a new world. Sean Braswell, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. You can read Sean Braswell's article, Who Might Challenge a President Trump in 2020 at Ozzy.com. Sean, thanks.
Thank you.
To understand where we are going, we have to understand the dynamics at play contributing to the current social and political disruption. Is the fear of multiculturalism at the root of Republicans' angst? For that, I bring in Sean Illing, a professor of politics and philosophy and a writer for Vox.com, who wrote this week, Why Social Media is Terrible for Multi-Ethnic Democracies. Welcome to the podcast, Sean.
It's great to be here, Jack. Thanks for having me.
In your article, you spoke to NYU social psychologist Jonathan Haidt about many things, including multiculturalism. Did you confirm if there was a correlation between the rise of Trump, growing global populism or nationalism, and multi-ethnic groups?
I think there's certainly a link, and I think it's impossible to miss. I think one of the problems we have in terms of political discourse is often we think we're arguing about the way the world is, the facts. But in fact, what we're really arguing about is the way we think the world ought to be. And what Jonathan studies is the sort of moral impulses and the kind of core value judgments beneath our political attitudes. These are the values from which our political beliefs spring. And conservatives and liberals, to take just two, you can break it down in different ways, but I think liberal conservatives is what most people understand. They see the world in very different ways. And I think Haidt's point is that when people perceive that things are getting troubled or things are slipping away, liberals and conservatives tend to retreat into these core impulses. And what distinguishes the conservative mindset is a kind of desire for moral order, for tradition, for cultural consistency. And so when things are perceived as going bad, what they do is tend to close ranks. And that leads to a kind of hostility to the alien other, to foreign groups, to any actors who are seen as not as outside of the traditional in-group. And it's really a kind of tribalism writ large. It really is just political tribalism. And what's happening in Europe with the immigration crisis and a lot of other factors is a kind of crisis, a kind of cultural crisis, where you have a lot of immigrants are moving into countries, and they're not being assimilated into those societies economically, politically, socially, and that's creating real unrest. And so now you're having a pushback. There's been a reaction against that, a right-wing fascistic reaction against that. People want to drive out these others, these foreign groups, and restore what they consider the kind of moral norm.
Explain to me about moral order, because when I think of morality, I think of anti-racism, basically all the core values of the Democrats, of the left. So when you say moral order, it's a little incoherent for me because
sure,
I understand that there's a morality that activates their political views. But within that morality, it just seems there's something off.
I think what you have to remember is that morality is relative. It's relative to whatever you value. And so what you consider good is going to hinge on what you consider, what you value in the world. And so if you're a conservative, by moral order, I think what you mean is a society that is homogenous, a society that shares more or less a body of values and practices and rituals and traditions. And if you're a liberal, what you tend to value, not that you don't value those things, but if you're a liberal, what you tend to value is inclusiveness and tolerance of other groups and other ideas, equality, these sorts of things. And those are very much in tension. If you're conservative, what you mean by order is closing ranks and purging those foreign bodies from the body politic and creating a more homogenous, more insular society. And I think that's what we're seeing here.
In your article, Jonathan said that that a lot of the genesis of this began in the 19th century. There was a conflict between labor and capital, which was the rub between Democrats and Republicans at the time. And as soon as the 60s in America came and in Europe, then all these new dynamics came into play, like civil rights, women's rights, gay rights. Parting from the 60s, moving forward, I had thought we had taken care of all of this. And so today in 2016, what is the dynamic at play today then?
Well, in many ways, we're still fighting the culture war, which really started in the 60s. I think Haidt's point was that the sort of big political fault line really had a lot to do with sort of class interest. You know, that's what he was talking about with labor and capital, the kind of capitalism versus communism, this kind of thing. And once communism really started to decline, and it was clear that capitalism had kind of won the day. This is Francis Fukuyama's, big thesis with The End of History, which is basically just a declaration that capitalism has kind of won, and this is the economic order. But what happened in the 60s with the kind of countercultural movement is the conversation changed. And what it became about was diversity, racial equality, fighting discrimination, a cultural openness. Basically, this is the birth of kind of cultural progressivism. And traditionalists and conservatives were not okay with this. This was the battle that was being fought in the 60s, and in many ways, it's being fought now. It's just manifesting in different ways. I mean, this is what the battle for, say, same-sex marriage is really about. Right? There's an element of the country that thinks that homosexuality is wrong, both for religious reasons and both because they think it's culturally anathema. And they see that this push for same-sex marriage as an extension of this cultural progressive movement, and they're very much battling against that. And so when we're spending more time fighting these culture wars than we are talking about actual economic policies, and that is, I think, a very, very bad thing for us, as Jonathan points out in the interview, because if we're having a fight over these core values, it's really intractable.
So how do we begin to trust each other once again? How do we begin to kind of forge a bridge where we can come together and create a country that all of us want?
Well, yeah, I hate to have to say it. I just don't have very good news on this front. We end the conversation that I had with Professor Haidt in a kind of depressing fashion, because his point was that social media, and I think the internet more generally, has made it almost impossible for us to have a conversation across ideological lines. And that's because we're living in information bubbles. A democracy requires deliberation, and deliberation requires that people be grounded in the same facts. We have to be talking about the same thing. And if you live in a situation in which you have a version of reality that is shaped by your reality, or rather you have a version of reality that is shaped by your ideology, and you can go to websites, you can listen to radio shows, you can listen to certain cable networks that will beam that reality right back at you. They will give you the version of the world you want to live in. And so long as that's the case, people are never going to really engage one another, because they really are, in a fundamental sense, living in different universes with different facts. And that makes it very, very hard. We're all sort of balkanized in that way. And the media has made that much more problematic, and I don't know how we get around that. I don't know how we all come together and sort of proceed from this sort of shared reality, because we all are in our own ways living in our own bubbles, and that makes it very, very difficult to communicate. And that's really the problem we're facing, because social media isn't going away. The internet isn't going away. As long as people want to have their visions of the world beamed back at them, the market will continue to supply it.
I'll be honest with you about something. I feel that society was asleep at the wheel for a long, long time, man. And I think what this did, and it's the silver lining that I see, is that it woke everybody up. They became aware of the political environment that we live in and how we do form a part of that. And whatever our feelings are, whatever our thoughts are, whatever our viewpoints are, now really matter more than ever. And so that's what I like about this. And I don't want to call it a unity, because it's not. The country's obviously polarized, divided, but amongst the left, they've united. And amongst the right, now we're united.
Yeah, I think there's some truth in that. I was talking to someone about this the other night, actually, and I was saying kind of the same thing, which is that we've been sort of tumbling towards an abyss for a very long time, and people tend to take political order for granted. They don't realize how close we are at any moment to losing it. And when something unthinkable happens, and I think what happened last week was in many ways unthinkable, certainly a year or two ago it would have been, that definitely has a way of shaking people out of their stupors. And if nothing else good comes out of this, at least maybe that will be the one thing.
You can read Sean Illing's article, Why Social Media is Terrible for Multi-Ethnic Democracies, at Vox.com. Thanks, Sean.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, Jack.
President Obama was one of the few presidents to believe in diversity in the White House. Take Sonia Sotomayor in the Supreme Court, for example. But now what will happen to diversity under President-elect Donald Trump? Will it continue to grow, or will it be shed to the side? To discuss this, I welcome Oliver.Staley, who covers management and workplace issues for the business website QUARTZ, who wrote the article, For 8 Years, the White House Championed Workplace Diversity and Inclusion. What now? Oliver, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
President Obama was the embodiment of workplace diversity, evident by the people that worked around him. Now that he's leaving and calls of racism and white nationalism are hurled at Donald Trump, what kind of diversity environment can we expect from Trump's White House?
Well, so the jury's out. He's only made 2 real appointments, so we don't know what his White House is going to look like.
And controversial appointments already.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think the appointment of Steve Bannon is, if that's any indication, may signal certainly a less inclusive White House, and one that does not place the same importance on inclusion, diversity, and equality. Steve Bannon is on the record of not putting a very high priority on those subjects, and has been dismissive and critical of women's efforts to achieve equal pay, and he's been very critical of feminism and efforts along those lines. So we simply don't know what his cabinet or White House appointments are going to look like. But there are things that he can do and not do that's going to affect diversity nationally, and that was sort of the focus of my article, because that I think can be very worrisome.
Why did you want to write this article? What were the trends? What exactly was it that stood out as soon as the election was over that sort of you were confronted with?
What struck me is how different Trump's rhetoric has been from the rhetoric we have gotten from President Obama and business leaders more generally, which is that they see a value in inclusion. They see a value in bringing diverse perspectives and peoples into management and into corporate boards and into the workplace. And Trump ran on what he called an anti-PC platform. He believed that the biggest problem in this country, I think he said this a few times, was that we're too PC. We care too much about diversity, inclusion, not offending people. So the way I view it is there are certain group of companies that are very progressive, and no one has to tell them to employ people from different races and genders and sexual orientation. They're doing it because they know it's important. There's another group that are sort of coming along behind that are starting to wake up to this, and they see the business case for it. They know that it makes them more competitive for they can hire. It makes them more competitive in a business sense. And then you have probably the majority of companies that aren't really persuaded yet that there's a value to diversity. And this is where I think Trump's influence can be felt, in that if he is skeptical about it and he sends the signals that he doesn't really care about it, and that then those business leaders may not make it a priority. They may no longer take the meeting with their diversity officer. They may no longer feel the need to attend minority cultural events, for example, or speak at, say, an NAACP dinner. They may just sort of
skip it.
Where once they may have felt some pressure, even if they didn't believe it, they may have felt some social obligation to employ and further diversity. They may no longer feel that. And I think that is one of the concerns.
The article, what struck me about the article is that you wrote in a two-pronged way. It was the political aspects of diversity and inclusion at the White House and also the private sector. One of the things that mostly stood out to me was what you pointed out with the EEOC, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which sets and enforces the rules against workplace discrimination. This is the part that actually could be revamped to fit Trump or Bannon's viewpoints. What do you think might happen here, and how bad could this get?
What we do know is that the president can appoint the chair of the EEOC. There's 5 commissioners, and the president identifies one of those to be chair. And some of those appointees were Bush appointees, and therefore Trump could name one of them to be chair. He also appoints the chief counsel, which is sort of as I understand it, sort of the main administrative head of the EEOC. And so those are significant, and those positions help set the direction and tone of the EEOC. Now, some of the things some of the levers that are out there, for example, is that next year the EEOC was going to require businesses to start reporting pay by gender and race. But going forward, the EEOC would be able to see what companies have been laggards in gender equality or paying people of different races the same. And Republicans have already feared this and have opposed it, thinking this is very intrusive and maybe an overreach. And there's reason to believe that a Trump administration would be friendly to those Republican views and may repeal that initiative. That's just one of a number of things that Trump could do and going forward with the EEOC.
A lot of people are concerned that corporations and media companies are for some reason going to start changing their attitudes because somehow Trump has enforced, listen, I don't need minorities to run this country whatsoever. Do you feel that there's going to be a loss in seeing the value of hiring diverse employees in the next 4 years?
I think this is really an interesting question because it gets down to what do companies feel there's an intrinsic value in having a diverse workforce, or are they just doing it because they feel some sort of social pressure to do so? And I think that probably comes down to a company by company question. I do know that the leaders that I have heard from, I quoted Ernst & Young in my article. That's the big accounting and consulting firm, but also Richard Branson, who he's British, but he runs the Virgin Media Group. They have said they're absolutely not backing down from this. They understand the value of it. And I think there's a big slug of American companies that feel that way, that this is now part of their DNA, that they value being diverse, that they want to attract. What I worry about is the smaller employers, the ones who feel like this is going to be, the mom and pop companies, the, regional employers. The ones who don't have the sort of the robust human resources apparatus to identify minorities and don't want to invest in those efforts, those are the ones I think that may be swayed here. And I think it just bears watching. And then, one of the conclusions that I reported in my article is that if the government isn't going to enforce these and the private sector isn't going to do the right thing, then people will have to resort to the courts.
And that's actually what I wanted to ask you about. What positive advice do you have for the diverse workforce moving forward? Is there a future for them now in corporate America?
I think it's generally people should be thoughtful about their opportunities, look around, and understand what the law is and what their rights are under the law. And if they feel that they have grounds, they should pursue appropriate remedies.
Well, you could read Oliver Staley's article, For 8 Years, the White House Championed Workplace Diversity and Inclusion, What Now, at QZ.com. Thanks, Oliver, for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Brad, can you give me your full name and what you do?
Sure. My name is Brad.Berfas, Berfas. I'm an attorney. I specialize in divorce litigation as well as mediation.
In your law practice, have you dealt with same-sex marriage laws?
I have.
Let's hypothetically say that Pence and Bannon want to get rid of same-sex marriage. Can this happen legally?
If they have the right people on the Supreme Court. I mean, now we know that, they're in the process of appointing different justices. If that so happens and you get the people that, quote unquote, you do for me, I do for you, as they say in this world, could that possibly happen to get it overturned? I'm not going to sit here and say no. That could be a possibility. And hypothetically speaking, like you said, it's definitely not number one priority, whether or not it's number 20 or 25. I don't even think it's up there, to be honest with you. But whether it's 20 or 100, could the reality happen that perhaps it's something that's looked into, something where it's voted on, something where the decision goes the reverse to overturn Supreme Court decision and reverse the thread, so to speak, and then make it a 5-4 decision the other way? Yeah.
Let me ask you, as a Trump supporter, what were you looking for in Trump that you weren't getting with the Obama administration and that you didn't feel that you were going to get with the Clinton administration?
Well, I think it's a new beginning. I think it's, we've had 8 years of president who honestly, just puts himself in the White House and really didn't do much. Obamacare was a disaster. It still is a disaster.
Are you dubious about Trump's character in any way?
I mean, his character, I think, again, is, to me, the type of person, I could bring this up, I think he's a bigger scale of Rudy Giuliani, who was mayor of New York. Trump is on obviously a bigger scale to have a lot of the characteristics that he had. And, again, does he have his faults? No one's perfect in this world. Of course he does.
But you're willing to take risks more on his faults than on Clinton's faults. I totally understand it. Now, here's another question. The stigma from the left to the right about Trump being president is that there's this populism movement that's going on that's very anti-immigration. Are you for it or are you against it?
I'm not anti-immigration, but I'm anti-illegal alien.
I think we all are. I think we can all agree on that, yes.
Well, yes and no, but the media or certain people come out and say, when they try to take certain lines from Trump, they basically say, oh, he's against immigration, or he's against all individuals coming into this country and build a wall and let's throw them all out. That's not what he's saying. And if people understand what's going on, he's basically saying the illegal aliens, the immigrants that don't register and take advantage of our system and take jobs away from people that are citizens of the United States, let alone the fact that it's been shown that the illegal aliens, to a certain degree, are cause for a lot of the terrorism in this country. If you eliminate those people by registering them in the state or not allowing them in the first place, yeah, I'm totally for it, because that would stop. It would give jobs back to the Americans that are citizens and not having to pay all the, with people that have school loans and trying to make better of themselves in America. They are losing out on the jobs because of these illegal aliens. So if they come in and they want to register and be documented, absolutely, bring them in. The more the merrier. That's the type of country we are.
Now, you know that you live in a blue state. it's a Democratic state, and you're obviously a Trump supporter. Have you had any conflicts with your friends, with family that might disagree with you? The fact that you live in New York and that Governor Cuomo just went out and said we're a refuge state. Anything that is basically against what Trump said is what we're for.
Absolutely. I've had things with, close friends of mine that feel, the complete opposite of what I've stated to you or what I've stated in the past. But in fact, I actually had a conversation with a good friend of mine who I went to law school this morning with. And the one thing we did agree on at this point in time is, whatever you say about Mr. Trump, it's time to move on. The country has spoken. Stop the insanity with all these protests, and let's unite together as a country and show the world at large that we are taking the world back. We are America, and at the same time, we should be together, not divided at this point. And that was the one thing that we did agree on because, it came up in conversation regarding the unfortunate situation of the protest that blocked the road, and unfortunately a man died because the ambulance couldn't get through. No one's saying people can't protest, people can't be peaceful in protesting, but this is more of a thing of, you voted, your candidate lost, and time to move on. If it was the flip side around, I can imagine what would be going on in the media right now.
That will conclude our 12th episode of the Highly Relevant Podcast. I want to thank Sean Illing, Oliver Staley, Brad.Berfas, and Sean Braswell for being on the show. I hope some of these interviews helped you understand, relate, or even learn a thing or two of our new dawn of American politics with Trump as our chosen president. Let's continue to have the discussion. Email me at highly.relevant@showbizcafe.com or tweet at me at JackRicoOfficial and share your opinions and thoughts on how you're feeling about Trump becoming our new president. That's it for now. Thanks for listening, and may God bless us all.